The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel is written to us by John. Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee, and a large crowd followed him, because they saw the signs he was performing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, however, and there he sat down with his disciples. The Jewish feast of Passover was near. He raised his eyes, and he saw that a large crowd was coming toward him. He said to Philip, "Where can we buy enough food for these many to eat?" He said this to test him, because he knew what he was going to do. And Philip answered him, 200 days' wages worth of food would not be enough for each of them to have even a little. Now one of his disciples, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, said to him, "There's a little boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good are these among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people recline." Now there was a great deal of grass in that place, so the men reclined, and they were about 5,000 in number. Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining, and also as much of the fish as they wanted. When they had their fill, he said to his disciples, "Gather the fragments left over, so that nothing will be wasted." So they collected them, and they filled 12 wicker baskets with the fragments from the 5 barley loaves that had been more than they could eat. When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, "This is truly a prophet, the one who is to come into the world." Since Jesus knew they wanted to come and carry him off to make him king, he withdrew back to the mountain alone. This is the gospel of the Lord. Some years ago, a man named Stephen Covey wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he said one of the most universal patterns was that effective people had a worldview of abundance. And much of the world has a worldview of scarcity. Let me describe very briefly. Apparently, you tend to get these worldviews very young, and they don't tend to change easily. They underlie almost everything else. If you have a worldview of scarcity, I myself was a child of parents who were born in the Depression and the Kansas dust storms. I think that's the worldview I was given. Protect what you have. There isn't enough to go around. There's never enough to go around. It's sort of a competitive win-lose worldview. It moves you toward anxiety, toward consumerism, toward possessiveness, because you can't lose. If your first experience of life was there could only be 5 guys on the starting team of the basketball game, you knew only 5 could make it. If only one girl can win the Miss America contest, everybody else loses. The worldview of scarcity is inherently insecure and grabbing. I'm afraid it's much of our country. There isn't enough health care to go around. I hear now that he even wants money for the parents and the children to be reunited at the border, that they have to pay for their children to fly back. That's a worldview of scarcity. When you don't want something, there's never enough. Now what we see here in the gospel is Philip and the disciples representing that worldview. There's only 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. What good are these among so many? But Stephen Covey says there's another worldview, and sooner or later you have to choose it. It doesn't come naturally. I'm convinced it's very close to the worldview of the gospel. It's a worldview of abundance. There's a big world out there. There's a lot of options. There's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of choices. There's always another creative way to look at it. Let's be honest with ourselves. Do we look at life that way? Most people don't. Most people are afraid they don't have enough and don't take advantage of the many levels of opportunity that life offers them. But of course, if you're dependent upon a finite source, if you only have, as most of us do, a limited amount of money, one limited intellect, one limited life, of course it's easy to look at life in terms of scarcity. There isn't enough. There isn't enough of me. There isn't enough of goodness. There isn't enough of God. This is most people. This is our country today. Thank God, not everybody. The worldview of abundance depends upon recognizing that you are in touch with an infinite source. If you've never made contact with an infinite source, you will be stingy. You will be selfish. You will guard and hoard the little bit that you have. This affects much, if not most, of our politics in this country. We're always afraid that someone else is taking what we have earned as if we had earned it. Most of it has been given to us, yes, by work, but also by grace and freedom and the choices of many other people, despite ourselves. Jesus represents the worldview of abundance in every one of his multiplication stories. There's always the making of much out of little, and there's always baskets left over. That's the only possible message. There's plenty. If you learn to be creative, if you learn to be imaginative, if you learn to be a little less selfish, there's always another way to look at it and another way to do it. If you weren't born, as most of us weren't, with a natural worldview of abundance, maybe it's something we have to ask for. Maybe it's something we have to choose. Maybe it's something we'll only fully experience when we learn to draw upon an infinite source. If the source is infinite, we are infinite. If our source is finite, of course, we are finite too.